some restrictions, what may happen to this ecosystem. I think having been in this ecosystem for a few decades, as I'm very, very ancient, usually the investment thesis for foreign VCs in Israeli tech was you better have a very solid technology barrier if you're going to invest in an Israeli company, because if the barrier is solid, then those guys are great technologists. It will be a good experience. If the barrier isn't significant enough, then it's going to be more about execution. And if it's about execution, US-based companies will eat their lunch any day. And that, I think, drove a lot of investments in the Israeli tech in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And consequently, if you build a company based on a deep technology barrier, you prove it out and you show that you've actually built it and people buy it and you get acquired for the technology. And so the exits we've seen over those decades used to be in the 100 to 200, maybe $300 million range, because as you got to early revenue, you would get picked up. And it wasn't a bad thing in my mind. When I look at the last decade, I think it's shifted dramatically. So when I did my own math and looked at all the companies that have become unicorns and are worth more than $1 billion, you would see that a lot of them didn't get there by having a technology barrier. They all have great technology because that's the resource that we have here with a very high density, but they want an execution. So at that point, you realize that the founding teams from recent years are out there not just to build great technology, they want to out-execute the market. And when you look at out-executing the market, you see that a lot of them suddenly have great US-based management teams. They have real revenue growth and a great trajectory, and they dominate their space, whatever that space is. And we've seen some of those go public. We've seen some of those go through great acquisitions, Movit being the last one from just the recent days. And then that, I think, has become an equalizer between the Israeli ecosystem and sort of a reflection of Silicon Valley, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so with that going into COVID days, on some levels, I think the Israeli ecosystem has been similar to any other ecosystem. The customer base is not in Israel, so it doesn't matter if the companies were started in Israel. The customer base is global, it's being affected, people are getting laid off, budgets are getting frozen. Certainly, sectorially, if you're a startup catering to some of the more impacted industries like airline and travel, then you'll be impacted more. But that's true for the same kind of companies in the US. Sure. In Israel, I think there has been less of the Silicon Valley type of companies that raised $200 million Series A and then just kept pouring unreasonable amounts of money into their company building.
Yeah, which is a real danger right now for these companies, especially unicorns, burning through cash. It seems unsustainable. So you're saying that's not the case so much in Israel?
Less so. Yes, less so. I think Israeli companies, since they're not native Silicon Valley companies, have had to be more rational about how they set up their execution plans and fundraise. And so you wouldn't see as much of this super high growth, high valuation type companies that now have to reset and rationalize. I think a lot of the companies that have been unicorns are based on more fundamental laws of economy. And are less based on an unclear unit economics and growth and just pour more money into it.
So how have valuations been affected? Have you seen those going down?
So I think what's happening now, which is true for any crisis of this magnitude, VCs first stop and reassess, because if you've funded a lot of companies, and COVID has played into a market that was frothy. I think going into COVID, we all expected some correction. We didn't expect a virus to help us correct, but we did think that when you look at public company multiples, they were a little out of whack. The market has been talking about revenue multiples for a very long time, and there's always that point where people go back to, wait a minute, what about earnings, and what about earnings multiples? And so COVID happened when the market was frothy to begin with. And now VCs look at the space and say, A, I need to save my good companies because that's bread and butter. B, I might need to save companies that may or may not be good, I don't know, but I need reserves because they're going to have a harder time raising capital. C, I probably need to deprioritize that part of the portfolio that probably is not going to make it. And honestly, was questionable even before COVID hit. And so first they assessed.
Sorry. Well, so there are companies which the VCs are not going to support through this. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, in my mind, I would say even that I think there is a range of companies reserves because they're going to have a harder time raising capital. C, I probably need to deprioritize that part of the portfolio that probably is not going to make it. And honestly, was questionable even before COVID hit. And so first they assessed.
Sorry. Well, so there are companies which the VCs are not going to support through this. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, in my mind, I would say even that I think there is a range of companies that shouldn't have been around, but the capital markets were so frothy and capital was so available that it funded way too many companies that have been insignificant, but artificially showed some progress. Those are going to go away, I think. This is Israel or not Israel.
Yeah, sure.
I think in Israel, again, I think we've been forced to build companies based on more stronger foundations. Mm-hmm. Because our access to capital is not the same as a Silicon Valley-based company. And so to some extent, I expect to see less of this in Israel, but Israel is like Silicon Valley in many ways. And I think there'll be companies that will be hard for us to raise capital at all. And so there are now...
Are those companies operating in a particular sector? So obviously, I suppose... Israel is like Silicon Valley, but then there are differences in that. There's a strong focus on R&D and healthcare and biotech, but which might see this through. But what are the sectors which might not see it through so well?
So clearly, there's a whole set of companies in Israel focused or relying heavily on ad tech, which is, I don't think they're going to go away, but advertising is hit pretty hard right now. Online advertising, they will kind of need to see themselves through this before it comes back. Companies optimizing, again, for industries like travel clearly are going to have a very hard time. At the same time, I think when you look at the Israeli ecosystem, fundamental infrastructure, whether it's streaming video for Team8, cybersecurity, data machine learning, AI, which is a lot of the companies that we build as part of a larger Israeli ecosystem of companies that do this. Cloud technology, anybody who's been forced to work from home realizes how challenging it is if your company isn't sufficiently cloud-based.
So a lot of that, I think, will provide new opportunities for a lot of the Israeli tech sector.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And how you found it? I mean, you've got a team which, no doubt, working from home, and you've had to adapt to the lockdown measures. So, from a personal point of view, how have you gone through this?
I start my day by wishing my first meeting happy Groundhog Day, because that's what it looks like. Every day is starting to look the same. So initially, you realize, wait a minute, this might be more efficient. You don't commute. Meetings are a lot more structured and focused. But then at some point, there is, I think, Zoom fatigue. You sit in front of your Zoom for 12 hours a day, every day. But we went through all of our companies and did a first round, which we call the defensive round, making sure everybody's okay, making sure budgets last for the next 2 years, even under very severe circumstances.
Okay.
Then we did a lemonade round, which said, fine, this is the situation. I am usually the most optimistic person in pretty much every room, and I'm not optimistic right now. I don't think this goes away anytime soon, even though we're starting to see signs of relief. And so I'd rather kind of hope for the best but plan for the worst. And so we've done that, but we also think there's huge opportunity in this new world. We're not going to go back to the same world that we left behind 6 weeks ago. And so a lot of our companies have specific angles, pretty much everyone does. So people work from home from a cyber perspective. It's a new attack surface. How do you address it? Some of our companies do it. We have a company, Duality, that is dealing with how can you enable things like tracking people for COVID purposes with 100% privacy preserved. Everybody's got some angle.
Yeah.
And we're doing a lot of things. We just, day before yesterday, had 100 CISOs, Chief Information and Security Officers, on a second of a series of Zoom sessions that we're doing. And you had the chief executives from a lot of countries around the world, from the biggest companies. This sense of community is something that people need at this time. So it enables you to see what others are doing. It enables you to get best practices from other people. And it was interesting because I asked how many of them or their teams have been on site, and this is from South Africa to European countries to Latin America to different places in the US. They haven't been on site for the most part for the last 6 weeks, almost all of them.
Right.
So it's very interesting. I have to say that Israel specifically took, I think, the right set of actions early on.
Yeah.
And so well ahead of the world, which is, I think, uncharacteristic of Israel to some extent, because our national motto is, don't worry, it's going to be fine. And in here, I think for a change, they took action early, they flattened the curve early. And so we're starting to see the dawn of the first wave of COVID, I think, era. And it's interesting. I think it will help in as much as we can, I think, now balance between how much time we spend on Zoom and how much time we actually get to see each other in the office.
So you're going back to the office now? People are slowly going back to work?
Yeah, so we're getting set up within Team 8. We're getting set up to go back on a partial basis next week. We're already partially in the office now.
Have you had to lay off any staff?
No. So the nice thing about Team 8 is that our model is very, very grounded. When we set out to build a company, we use our entire village to keep us honest that we're solving the right problem, that we are thinking the right way about solving it. And then as we go to solve it, we have a lot of market intelligence into what we're building. And so our companies generally are well funded. They're at that stage where they know what they're building and who's going to buy it. And even if it takes cycles take longer, they'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. And you're looking at, you mentioned earlier, making sure you've got enough capital to run 2 years. Is that the kind of timeline you're looking at until things return to normal?
So first, I would say 2 years is the common US VC mantra these days.
Yeah.
I think it's dangerous like any other mantra. So different companies have very unique situations. And so as a rule, it's not a bad rule of thumb, but for different companies, you might want to actually accelerate now. For some companies, you might want to be even more conservative. But yes, when I look at what's coming, I think there is going to be a wave over the next month or two where mostly people are going to say, well, this whole thing was just a flu. We told you it's an overreaction. And then it will come back. And I think next winter it will come back again. And so there is going to be a little bit of a sense of, I think, relief. But the market's not going to go back because a lot of people have been laid off. A lot of the larger companies are going to sit there saying, it's uncertainties, but times of uncertainty, you better be very careful how you spend just in case this comes back, which I think it will. But even if it doesn't, so spend is going to be lower, employment is going to be lower. In the US, which affects all of us, there is going to be a huge amount of money flowing in between now and November. But some of this bailout money is set up so that it keeps the economy going until November, but post-elections, it's going to be the next winter. I don't think we have a cure by then. And I think post-election, the bottom really falls off this thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's a big thing. It's a big date, which is coming up in November. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's all the questions I have for you, but that's given me a really good understanding of where it is, of where the Israeli space is at. Or just one final thing. Are you seeing any from your investment companies? Are there any significant changes that people are having to make, or is it just similar all around, that there is a kind of general I don't know, general movement going back to work slowly?
I'm not sure because you broke up a little at the beginning of your question. You're asking about investing, or are you asking about go to work?
So sorry, yeah, the companies right now that you are investing in, are there any significant winners or losers you can point to?
No, I think it's too early to call any of this because nobody knows. We're all a little underwater trying to reach out with our feet to see if we hit bottom yet.
Yeah.
I think Q1 results are a little bit misleading because they incorporate a lot of the previous momentum. And so Q1 results overall have been pretty good for our companies and for other companies. I think Q2 is where it will get more difficult. And that's not the end of the world. The big question is what happens Q3, Q4, and how long does it last? Because initially people will seem to be fine, even though their cash reserves are starting to deplete.
Yeah.
And only then you know who's going to really make it and who won't. And if this is going to be a short episode, then it will be a blimp and we'll forget about it. If, like I suspect, it will be longer, only then I think you will start to see the winners versus the losers. The unlucky ones are the ones that this whole thing caught them with depleted cash positions, and now they have to go fundraise.
Yeah, which presumably they will get less favorable terms given the valuations.
So VCs, if this is a great deal, VCs will still jump on it and try to get better terms. If this is not a special deal, then VCs will say, well, there's kind of regular risk. Now there's also COVID risk. Why should I put myself in this position? Let's wait a year. Worst case, I missed a good deal. And And so, no, I think some of those guys that need to go fundraise now might not be fundable pretty much, period, unless they really recap the company. And this whole thing also ties into this whole PPP conversations that a lot of startup boards are having right now. You are eligible theoretically as a small business if you're under 500 people to take money from the Paycheck Protection Plan in the US, but only if you really are about to die without it. And there's a lot of gray area in there that's creating a lot of board discussions. And Israeli companies are part of those conversations as well. At Team 8, we pretty much decided not to take any of this money across our entire portfolio. Some companies that are not fundable at all, I think can and should take it. Companies who are fundable but will have to do a down route probably shouldn't be eligible. But there's a lot of that conversation going on.
Okay. Interesting. Great. Yuval, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Interesting. And Andrew, thank you for setting this up at such short notice. And everyone else, thank you for joining. It's been really
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you. And Andrew, once again, thank you so much for arranging that. We appreciate it. And if you need anything, Andrew and I will be happy to help you.
Super. Thank you very much, everyone.
Right.
Ollie will speak. Ollie, give me a buzz if you need anything else.
Sure, I will do, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Stay healthy, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.